Hello and welcome. I'm Psychic Medium Roberto, and I truly hope you're doing well today. Alright, just a quick note to the subscribers on my channel. I really appreciate your support, and I'll continue giving you some good episodes and look at current news as well. In today's episode of Profile by Numbers, I'm taking a slight slant and looking at a sporting incident that happened in 2021, and that was during the Formula One season, where at the final race of the season, both Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen were on equal points down to the last race to see who would win the championship. And we know there was a lot of controversy around the time. And so let's have a look and see what the numbers say about the day of the incident. All right, let me take a moment to focus and tune in. Let me set the scene, what happened on the final race, or let me set the scene as to what was the build-up for the final race. And also there were legacy issues at play here because, at the final race, Lewis Hamilton had already won 7 world championships, equaling the record set by Michael Schumacher. But of course, at this stage, most of the records had also been broken. And of course, in this era of Formula One, they are racing more and there are points differences. However, both drivers, that would be Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher, at this stage, both had 7 world championships. And of course, if Lewis had won this race, the final race, he would become then the most decorated Formula One driver in the history of the sport. So that was at play here. So let's have a look at the day of the event. So the final race was held on December the 12th, 2021, which has the double 12 threes, the double fives, and the 6 as well as the 11-2 outcome. Now I can tell you, just looking at that day, so when the sun rose that day on the Sunday morning, we have the presence of the double threes and the double fives. Now I must say, from a numerology point of view, that is detrimental. And the reason why I say that is because we have a mass of numbers, the double threes and the double fives. And unfortunately, when you have that combination in play, not very good. And in fact, being a Formula One fan myself, and it's obviously growing in popularity in the US, and of course the origins are in the United Kingdom, what concerns me here is the mass of threes and fives, okay? Now, those threes, so let's look at it from a negative aspect, right? When you have those kind of numbers, those 12, 3, 12, 3, those are the same kind of numbers that we see in Russia's constitution. Very controlling, very abusive, and coupled with the double fives, that just compounds that even further. Fives is all about deception, deceit, lies, bigotry, racism, all the worst things you can imagine placed on one day. And I don't want to make this a race issue, but when you have the double fives there, that is all about racism. Racism. Okay, if you're looking at it from a negative aspect. Now, on the day, the outcome, we have an 11-2. Now, when you have an 11-2 in a crime situation, because I think this was a crime, we acknowledge that there was a law had been broken with the 11-2, and definitely a law had been broken that when you have all those threes and all those fives, abuse of power, people in control who are abusing their power comes into play big time here. And unfortunately, when I saw that layout, there was definitely an issue. Now, let's have a look at the race perspective, right? Lewis Hamilton was way ahead of Max Verstappen, okay? He was far enough to secure the win without a doubt. However, the race was brought to a halt a few laps to the end when Nicholas Latifi crashed his F1 car. Now, as a result of that crash, that lead that Lewis Hamilton had was reduced considerably. In other words, the safety car was brought out as a safety precaution because they had to remove Nicholas Latifi's car, and that took a couple of laps. Now, the context at the time, this championship was hotly contested between Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Mercedes, and Red Bull, respectively. Okay. Now, I will say that Michael Massey, who was the race director at the time, was under enormous pressure. We had a season where it was jostling between two warriors, and it was an amazing season. It really was. I loved the season. Now, when you get down to the last race, technically, as I mentioned, Massey was under pressure. What he had on the day were the rules and regulations how the race should be run. And if there is an accident or a crash, then these are the certain protocols to follow when the race is stopped due to a crash. Now, what I found interesting, and I played back the video myself, and that is, at the time of the crash, Michael Massey made it very clear that the cars in between Lewis and Max at the time, or let's say the cars in between Lewis and Max who had been already lapped during the race, will not be shuffled around to the back of the grid. So in other words, what I'm saying is the cars that were lapped during the race were going to stay in their position, because in most circumstances the lap cars will be allowed to go past the leaders to rejoin the group at the back. Now, I don't want to make it too technical, so let's just say this. At the time of the crash, Michael Massey said the cars will not overtake the leaders, they will stay where they are. Now, given that decision still puts Lewis Hamilton finishing the race first, and the reason for that is there were too many cars in between Max, and as it turned out, he would have only had one lap to get past those cars and to get past Lewis Hamilton, and I believe he would not have been able to do that. Okay, then all of a sudden, to give context, I don't know how long, I didn't time it, but let's say 5 to 10 minutes later, Michael Massey goes on the radio and allows the cars to go past the leaders. So what that meant was Lewis Hamilton, at the start of the restart of the race, had Max Verstappen right behind him, who was on fresher tires. He had the red band tires on, which are the softs, and Lewis, I believe, still had the old white band tires, which are the hard compound, a lot slower than the red compound that Max was driving. Now, when Michael Massey made that decision to let the cars pass, technically we should have still had 2 laps of safety car, and that itself was reduced to 1. So there was a lot of controversy and juggling of the rules and regulations for this final race. In fact, for the final lap of the season. Now, I'm just going to put a disclosure here. Max Verstappen had nothing to do with the outcome or decisions made by the FIA. This is definitely not an attack on Max Verstappen, but Michael Massey meddled with the rules. And of course, the outcome favored Max Verstappen, right? So let's look at this from a numerology point of view. And I do have a paragraph that I wrote down psychically about Lewis Hamilton and the day that he found himself in. But let's first look at this from a numerology point of view. What's interesting here, so we're going to start at the left, FIA. So the FIA is the governing body for motorsport in the world. And the head of the FIA at the time was Jean Todt. And the race director for FIA, as mentioned, is Michael Massey. Then you get the shareholders and commercial rights holder, which is Liberty Media for F1. And the CEO of F1 is Stefano Domenicali. And of course, then we have Nicholas Latifi, Lewis Hamilton, and Max Verstappen, which are the race drivers. Now, the reason why I brought Nicholas in is because his crash caused this whole controversy. Or at least say, let's just say, and I should keep on that, but let's just say, for objective sake, that as a result of Nicholas Latifi's crash, the rest unfolded. Now, the paragraph that I mentioned is going to make sense about this Nicholas Latifi incident. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, so let's look at the FIA. We see there as well, we have the mass of double fives. Now, for me, if we look at that at a positive aspect, right? It's about international, it's about import-export, and of course, motorsport is enjoyed around the world. But what concerns me from a negative aspect, if we have those double fives, brings in those issues of racism, fraud, corruption, money issues, whether it's fraudulent or stolen or whatever, not very good there. And the outcome for the FIA 13.4 is about bringing the sport to the community. And, you know, being in sport, you want to see, in this particular sport, motorsport, you want to see numbers like 4, 7, and 8. Okay? 4, 7, and 8. So the outcome 4 with the FIA, fantastic. No issues there whatsoever. We look at Jean Todt, who was the head of the FIA at the time. And subsequently, at the end of this year, 2021, Jean Todt was stepping down. And he has the life path 11.2. So the outcome 11.2. Now, 11.2 is a power number. It's about bringing people together. It's about connecting people with predominantly a business mindset, with a business outcome, with an entrepreneurial outcome, bringing organizations together, bringing teams together, bringing drivers together, all plays in that 11.2. However, on the negative aspects of that 11.2 can be very detrimental. In other words, the opposite is true. He can tear people apart. He can bring businesses apart. All the negative aspects of that, right? So when we look at Michael Massey, now he has interesting numbers here. Now in that red block, I'm going to focus on that red block, 14.5. Now on a negative, and I'm just going to say in a negative aspect, can also be very racist. Goes against the status quo. And then we have that 12.3. 12.3 on a positive aspect is about bringing people together as well for the creating community. It's about community, team player, as it were, if everything is going well. However, that 12.3 can also be very abusive, abuse of power, and not very nice in a negative aspect. And we'll recall that on December the 12th, we have that 12.3, 12.3. Right, so I'm going to leave it at that. And then with Stefano, we also note on the top line there, the 5, the 11.2, and I've discussed all these numbers, and the 3. Not very good, unfortunately. Now, let's go back a little bit in time, in history. So on the top left there, I've got MS, which is Michael Schumacher. And while I was putting these slides together, I just thought, you know what? Something kept pinging on me to say there is a legacy issue at play here. There is a legacy played issue because before that race started, as mentioned, Michael had 7 world championships. And I thought, let me just bring in his date of birth, born January the 3rd, 1969. Now, he also has that 11-2 outcome. Now, what's very interesting here, now hear me out, and this is not a conspiracy, this is fact. Jean Todt and Stefano, in the past, all managed in senior levels for Ferrari, 1, and Jean Todt in particular was the team principal for Ferrari during the glory and golden years of Ferrari. And the driver at the time was Michael Schumacher. So I believe, and it keeps pinging on me, that Michael Schumacher's record, because technically he's still number 1, even though Lewis also has 7, but he would be number 2 still in the world overall rankings of the sport, right? So what we have here is, I believe, and I keep getting this impression, I believe there was a need to preserve legacy, and I'm going to say it's based, and it's also included race issue, because we see those double 5s on December the 12th, and we see in the FIA double 5s, and who was the head of FIA during the race? Jean Todt. All have ties to Michael Schumacher. Now let me tell you, let me be the first to say, I was a huge, and I still am, a huge Michael Schumacher fan. I watched every single race, I watched all his championships, I've got flags on my walls, I love Formula 1. But what concerns me is the role players here all had very strong ties to the success years of Michael Schumacher. So what am I getting to? Let me quickly read this paragraph, how I feel the theme of the day went. Okay? The day began with the cards stacked against Lewis. Any possible chance to not allow a black man to win 8 championship titles and become the most decorated driver in the history was acted upon. The decision was enforced by the FIA and its representatives and paddock associates, including at least one driver knowingly. When the day ended, an injustice had occurred based on skin color. Right, let's go back to the main chart here. Trust me, I've been meditating on this for over 2 or 3 weeks, okay? So let's have a look here. On that day, we got the 12-3, 12-3, double 5s. Pings directly on FIA, pings directly on Michael Massey, and of course will ping directly on Stefano, pings directly on Nicholas, and the double 5s impact Lewis, and we see the 12-3 with Max Verstappen as well. Now let's look for a moment to the following day, the next Monday morning, when the dust had settled on December the 13th. We still have the 12-3. Now, alarm bells seen the 13-4. And we see the 5. Still the double 5s with the outcome 12-3. Now, what's interesting in that block, 7-5, 12-3 pings directly on Michael Massey. Directly. Okay. What am I getting to here? So that Monday morning, the world was either celebrating Max Verstappen's win, and the other half of the world were in shock and horror that Lewis did not win the title. So that 13-4, I believe, created a shift in the sporting world, and in particular in the motor world, where we see that 13.4 impacts directly on Lewis Hamilton, as well as FIA 13.4. That was detrimental for Lewis, and of course it became detrimental for the FIA, because it was very clear to see that had Michael Massey stuck to the rules, Lewis should have won that race. And you know, at the time in 2021, I used to write little blogs and stuff about F1 as well, right? Now, for me, and because of my psychic nature, when I was doing about midway through 2021, I had the impression that Lewis was going to win his 8th championship. Definitely, without a doubt. During the middle of the year, Lewis was going to win the championship. So when this happened on that day, my head turned 90 degrees because there was interference in the outcome of the race. With the mass of 3s and the mass of 5s, there was manipulation going on in the background. And I believe on the first call, Michael Massey made the right call on the first call. The cars will not overtake. So now why did 10 minutes later the decision was changed? And I believe there was manipulation from the FIA that changed the outcome of this race and changed the outcome of the championship. And again, I'm going to say, this is not about Max Verstappen. He had no control of the decisions being made by the FIA, of course. He was in his car. But the horrific outcome impacted Lewis tremendously. The double 5s, racism, and the 13.4 direct link to FIA and the outcome. So when we woke up on December the 13th, 13.4, this was a miserable time for Lewis and for the FIA. Reputational damage. And you know, that was Jean Todt's last action, protecting the integrity of the legacy of Michael Schumacher. So the big question everyone's been asking, and of course Michael Massey has to listen to his boss, and with those 14.5s in Michael Massey as well, not very nice. Alright, so let's have a look here. The big question that people were asking at the time, did Nicholas Latifi crash his car intentionally? So let's look at his date of birth, born June 29, 1995. So he has a mass of 6s. Now I can tell you, you know, I almost want to laugh because, and with respect, you know, making F1 is great. You know, his father had a lot of money, got him in, he was a paid driver. Not necessarily there on merit, but when you get those masses of 6s, and if you have been watching Formula One, you will know Nicholas Latifi would crash on a regular basis, and that's the 6s. Violent crashes, and when you have that many 6s in your date of birth, can be detrimental. So he has the outcome 14.5 there as well. Very alarming. So the short answer for Nicholas Latifi, did he crash the car intentionally? I received the message, yes. And he was running last. He had nothing to lose. How do you crash a car on 3 laps or 4 laps from the end? Or whatever it was, 5 laps. No surprise there. Bigotry, racism in those 5s. And of course, as mentioned in the paragraph that I read, any opportunity to prevent Lewis Hamilton from winning the 8th title, which I tell you, I definitely saw him winning when I looked at it in the middle of the year leading up to this. Completely horrified that this happened. And the outcome there with the 12.3 on Michael Massey, direct impact on him, as well as Jean Todt and the FIA. So in my opinion, when the moment seized or when the moment presented itself, of course, everyone took action. All right, so unfortunately, and this is what confirms it for me as well, when I was doing my little blogs and vlogs about Lewis Hamilton and winning the championship, at the time he was going to win, and on the day it was stolen from him. And in my opinion, Lewis should have won the 8th title, but I believe preservation was at play with those double fives, unfortunately. All right, let me know what your thoughts are, and please send your comments. I'd love to read your comments. If you have not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button and hit that notification icon. And I'll just say stay safe, stay alert, and I'll see you in the next one.